I pulled up an hour early and parked down the block like a guest who wasn't sure she belonged. The dashboard clock glowed, and I rehearsed hello the way you rehearse a line before you walk on stage. Slow breath, soft smile, no edge. Last year, they'd celebrated their 30th anniversary without me and had the audacity to call it keeping the peace. When I pressed my mother later, she admitted it had been deliberate, as if honesty could scrub the stain. Months passed through Thanksgiving and Christmas without a call. Then a forwarded email arrived, no direct message, just a generic invitation. So of course, the part of me that still believed effort could rewire history drove there with $1,000 of carefully chosen gifts. I stepped into the kitchen and said, "Happy anniversary," and my mother didn't look up from her vegetables. "You shouldn't have come," she said, and my father laughed like it was a punchline. "It's not like anyone missed you last year either. They didn't pretend, even for show." I put the gift bag down and walked out past relatives and neighbors, staring like they'd arrived at a movie mid-scene. My uncle watched me cross the dining room, his face puzzled, unwilling to get involved. Outside in the car, my hands settled on the wheel, and for a long minute, I didn't drive. I thought about the weeks of overthinking what to wear, what tone would be least threatening, what offering might finally be enough. And then I opened my phone. Canceling the bouquet scheduled for the morning took 3 taps. Removing their access to the joint account took 15 seconds. For almost 2 years, I had against every boundary I knew I needed, covered bills and groceries, and even a seasonal roof repair, while they congratulated themselves for getting by. $3,000 a month quiet money, the kind meant to keep the temperature down, so holidays wouldn't boil over. They never said thank you. The confirmations rolled in like small doors closing. Florist cancellation approved, bank permissions revoked. The family group chat ignited with outrage. "Why would you do this? You embarrassed your parents. What kind of daughter does this on their anniversary?" I wrote one sentence. "You said you were better off without me. Now you get to prove it." I turned off my phone and drove home, feeling the first clean breath I'd had in years. Silence followed me inside, the kind that isn't absence, but relief, and I learned what it meant to sit without bracing for the next request disguised as duty. The quiet lasted until my sister Katie texted at 8:13 p.m., asking what happened. Then another message landed. Her rent payment had failed. She thought Dad handled it. That was the unraveling. She hadn't known that when she called me sobbing a year and a half earlier, because Mom told her to figure it out, I had covered 3 months in advance and linked her landlord to that joint account. My parents let her believe the help came from them because it made them look like providers while I remained the bank in the wall. I told her I'd keep helping, but directly, not as a secret funnel that taught her to be grateful to the wrong people. I went to bed feeling steady and woke to a voicemail from my father, the weary performative tone that says, "The speaker thinks they're the hero." "All right, you've made your point." He pivoted to scolding about humiliating them, then landed on the line that lodged under my skin. "Don't forget who gave you everything." I thought of the years I'd equated obedience with love, the way they dragged my choices through shame, until I learned to preempt their judgment by making myself small. The next morning, Katie drove 3 hours and stumbled into my apartment, pale, exhausted, whispering, "Tell me everything." I told her. She sat very still and said, "So all the thank yous I sent her." I nodded. "She let you send those texts to her while I paid the invoices." She swallowed hard. "They're going to come after you," she said. "I know," I said, and later that day the storm arrived. There were messages about betrayal and bloodlines, my mother's long essay about sacrifice, my cousin May, urging me not to burn bridges. That evening, my mother called, Katie, the voice soft, the tone repentant. "Tell Natalie to come by tomorrow. We just want to talk." I went, not because I believed them, but because the part of me that used to crawl wanted to see if it still would. The living room smelled the same lemon polish and stale coffee, and my parents sat like actors in a skit about reconciliation. Maybe we didn't handle things kindly, my mother said. My father took the handoff. You've always been emotional, Natalie. There's a way to resolve things without burning everything down. Their grievance wasn't what they'd done. It was how it looked. When I said I'd keep helping Katie, but wouldn't let them use her as leverage, my father stood and threatened to make calls to damage my job. I stood too and told him I had built my life by unlearning the rules they taught me. My mother's face flickered with shock and then settled into fury. You think you're better than us? You didn't raise a daughter, I said. You raised a bank account. Katie moved closer to me. I walked out this time, not trembling, just done. That night she texted, "You were right, and I promised to send her rent directly." My uncle called to accuse me of cruelty, and I blocked him. The next day, a letter arrived with no return address, 2 pages typed. My father had itemized things I'd paid for, as if they were debts I owed back to them, and closed with, "You made a choice. So did we." A lawyer friend called it absurd and told me not to respond. When my mother posted a public Facebook monologue about being abandoned and it collected prayers and pity, I commented, "Should I start posting receipts, or would you prefer I deliver them in person?" She deleted the post within minutes, but the deletion didn't undo the stagecraft. They were building a story in which they were victims of my coldness, and I knew from experience that too many people prefer a simple lie to a complicated truth. Still, something in me had shifted. Fear had burned off and left bone. Type continued to receive the next part. They tried to bait me back with contrition that tasted like sugar on a rusted spoon. After a few days of quiet, a quiet that hummed like a live wire, I woke to a blocked number voicemail with my mother's voice swollen by tears. "You win," she said. "We were wrong. Please come by. No yelling, no blame." It was the first time in my memory she had used the word wrong in relation to herself. I called Katie and she said she'd go with me. We arrived at dusk. The shade of the maple tree lay across the porch like a shadow that had learned its territory over decades. Inside, my father kept his arms crossed, jaw tight. My mother stood open-palmed. "We want to move on," she began, then glanced at my father, who took his cue. "What if we made you co-owner of the house legally? It's what's fair. You've helped so much." For a heartbeat, it sounded generous. Then I saw it, not a gift, a tether. I would be legally bound to their crises, tied to every bill, dragged into every leak and lien, and late notice my name fused to their address like a chain. "That's not what she needs," Katie said. "It's goodwill," my mother insisted, and when I asked what happened if I said no, my father shrugged the contempt slipping like a familiar glove. "You'll say no because you want to play the victim. The mask always cracks if you watch long enough." "I'm not taking anything from you," I said. "Not the house. Not your apologies. Not your guilt." My father snapped, "You'll come crawling back," and I told him they had just lost their last chance. Katie stood and left with me, and later that week, she changed her mailing address and asked her landlord to expect a transfer directly from me. She texted, "You're the only one who never used me." That simple sentence bent something old and rigid inside me, as if an iron bar warmed and finally flexed. My parents tried a fraud claim on the closed joint account, and when that failed, they moved to rumor. A mutual acquaintance messaged me that she'd heard them telling people they were heartbroken and worried I'd gotten mixed up with unstable influences. I didn't engage, but I saved the screenshot the way you collect a weather record of a hurricane, to remind yourself that the one sunny day doesn't cancel the storm. The odd grace was my cousin Evan. We weren't CL type. The new apartment had windows that drank the morning and a tiny balcony where potted herbs could pretend they were a garden. The first night I slept there, my body a stubborn historian woke at 3 a.m. and listened for the old house sounds I had trained myself to expect the phone buzzing with a crisis, the hinge's complaint before a demand, the soft creep of obligation across the floorboards. The silence was so large, I mistook it for loneliness until I felt it settle around my ribs like good air. I texted Katie a picture of sunrise sliding up the walls, and she replied, "You look happy." I realized I was. There were still echoes, of course. The past clings where it can. I found a box of journals with entries that began, "Maybe if I just," and "What if I am the problem?" I read them the way you might study a map you used long ago to survive a bad road, not to mourn the route, but to honor the traveler who walked it. I wrote one last note on the back page before dropping the journals into the recycling bin. "You were just the first to stop pretending." I didn't post it anywhere. Not everything needed an audience. When everyday life returned work deadlines, laundry, the small holy ritual of making food for yourself, because you want to, not because you must, I noticed how much energy I had spent managing their feelings. Without that labor, the hours widened. I started taking long walks after dinner. I wrote to my future the way I used to write apologies. My phone, once a siren of family alarms, went quiet, except for the messages that mattered. Katie sent pictures of her new apartment crooked shelves she learned to level a plant she rescued from a grocery store and coaxed back to green. We swapped recipes, real ones, with garlic and laughter. She told me she had stopped bracing before every call, stopped rehearsing neutral sentences to avoid triggering a skirmish. "I used to think you were the difficult one," she said on the phone one night, "because they told me you were. I think you were just the only one willing to say the truth out loud." I didn't answer for a long breath because the recognition was its own medicine. People asked if I missed my parents. The question arrived like a dentist's gloved hand, efficient, curious, unaware of tender nerves. I didn't miss the fighting. I missed the fantasy that one more gesture would unlock a door that had never been built. I missed the version of family I had been promised and never received. That grief was clean. It didn't demand penance. Around month 3, my father tried a new approach. A relative I barely knew forwarded an email in which he wrote about forgiveness as a ledger item, as if my return could be negotiated by the right terms. He mentioned again the house co-ownership legacy. Control dressed as benevolence. I had learned to recognize that costume. I forwarded the email to my lawyer friend, who filed it where important nonsense goes, and I went for a walk that smelled of rain and basil from my balcony. The next day, my mother sent a picture of the family group at a picnic, everyone smiling, while a caption about missing pieces did the quiet work of accusation. I blocked the account, and then unblocked it, and then blocked it again, letting myself be human about it. Healing is not a staircase. It's a map of footprints circling back until the grass grows over the old path. Evan checked in, not with evidence this time, but with a link to a community center volunteer program and a text that said, "Thought this might be your speed." It was. I spent Saturday mornings handing out pantry boxes, which felt like the opposite of what I had escaped, generosity that required nothing back. One woman pressed my hands and said, "You have a calm spirit." I didn't, not always, but sometimes the way we are seen teaches us how to be. In quiet hours, I wondered whether I was telling myself a noble myth about boundaries and truth and chosen family just to cover the ache. Then I'd get a midweek call from Katie asking how to fix a leaky faucet, and we'd laugh and figure it out, and I would remember that not all stories hide knives. Some stories pass you a wrench and a YouTube link and say, "You've got this." The last test arrived not with a knock, but with circumstance, a minor health scare that required an overnight stay for observation. I opened my medical app to change my emergency contact, half expecting the system to resist the update the way people do. It took 2 clicks. I typed Katie's name and pressed save. Later, when she arrived with a tote of practical things, lip balm, charger socks, she sat beside the bed and said, "I keep thinking they're going to discover how much we've built without them." I said, "They can know. It doesn't give them keys." She smiled, and in that moment, I understood that safety is not the absence of danger, but the presence of a person who doesn't use your fear to steer you. The discharge nurse asked who was driving me home, and when I said my sister, the word fit. Not because of blood, but because we'd chosen to show up for each other after the story that raised us tried to script us apart. Type, continue to receive the next part. My parents' latest act played out in smaller rooms. Without the joint account to mine or the public fight to exploit, they settled into telling acquaintances they were open to reconciliation, while implying I refused to meet them halfway. Halfway to what I wanted to ask the house deed, the social performance, the myth of the selfless child. But I let the question stay unasked and kept living my life. There were relapses of memory. I'd pass a store display of blue orchids and think of the bouquet I canceled in the car that night, and feel the twin sensations of satisfaction and sorrow. The mind keeps souvenirs the first time you don't apologize for leaving. The first morning, you don't wake to prove you deserve to stay. When the holidays came, Katie and I invented our own rituals. We cooked badly and then better. We invited people who loved us without contingency and went around the table naming one thing we were leaving behind. I said, the belief that love must be earned by sacrifice. Someone clinked a glass. Someone passed pie. My phone stayed face down and silent. In January, I returned the keys to my old apartment and drove by my parents' house once a handful of blocks out of the way. I didn't stop. I studied the familiar porch and the gray line where the paint peeled and felt both the ache of the first story and the relief of the second. I drove home to my balcony and watered basil and texted Katie that I had chosen my direction and didn't feel the need to say it out loud to anyone else. The month after that, a legal envelope did arrive, not from my parents, but from a debt collector, misdirected by their rumor-laced web. My lawyer friend cleared it in a day and reminded me to keep every document. I filed it beside the folder Evan had given me and the screenshots of their performances and the note I'd written on the back of the old journal. The file wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. When guilt tried to sell me nostalgia, I could hold up fact. People love to say that time heals as if the clock were a surgeon. What time does, if you let it, is prove the truth by repetition. Safe choices still feel safe after 100 days. Dangerous dynamics remain dangerous even after a quiet month. By spring, the rumor current slowed, or maybe I stopped wading into it. I did, however, run into an old neighbor who said with earnest eyes, "Your parents just want peace." I said, "So do I," and left it there. Peace with conditions isn't peace. It's a treaty with someone who thinks you're territory. I wasn't territory anymore. I was a person with a front door and a lease in my name, and a sister who had become my emergency contact, not out of habit, but out of trust. My father used to say, "Family is everything," a slogan that worked like fog. It hid every sharp edge behind a romantic blur. I learned to ask everything, at what cost? The answer used to be, me, my money, my time, my quiet, my sense of self. Not anymore. The final time I let them into my head was the afternoon the sun fell through the blinds in long gold strips, and I found myself composing a letter I'd never send one that would start with, "I did not abandon you. I stopped abandoning myself." I let it exist as a private ceremony and then closed the laptop and made dinner. I stirred the pot with an easy wrist and thought of that night in the kitchen when my mother didn't look up. If I could slip a sentence backward through time, I'd hand that woman at the threshold, "This truth, leaving a room where you are not welcomed, is not cruelty, it is clarity. The people who love you will meet you at the door you walk through. The people who love control will complain about the door you closed. Choose accordingly." I chose. I still believe in repair, but it requires acknowledgement, not performance. Boundaries, not bargains. Amends, not optics. I would have accepted an apology that wasn't bait. They chose the bait. I chose my life. And in choosing my life, I discovered that you can honor the good your parents gave you, my mother's work ethic, my father's stubborn will, and refuse the harm they wrapped it in. You can be the daughter who learned to be generous and also the woman who doesn't finance her own diminishment. If there is a lesson anyone might borrow from my map, it is this: silence feeds control. Truth starves it. Tell the truth even if your voice shakes. Keep your receipts literal and otherwise. Pay love forward where it multiplies instead of where it disappears. The morning I realized the worst was over, I was doing something ordinary, bringing coffee onto the balcony and listening to the city wake. The sky wore that thin, hopeful blue that makes you think of notebooks and new shoes. I texted Katie a picture of sunlight on Basil, and she sent back a video of her dancing with a mop in her kitchen. Two women from the same house, two daughters of the same story rewriting it, one grocery list, one lease, one laugh at a time. If my parents ever truly change, if they ask for forgiveness without trying to buy influence, if they say, "We were wrong," and then go do the work that sentence requires, I might meet them across a table years from now and talk like strangers trying to be kind. Until then, I wish them a peace that doesn't depend on my compliance. I wish myself a peace that doesn't crack under other people's narratives. I wish Katie the kind of future where she never again confuses strings for support. We build that wish by living it. The rest is weather. Type continue to receive the next part. I didn't write this to recruit a side or to humiliate anyone. I wrote it because stories like mine hide in plain sight behind polite smiles and well-framed family photos. Maybe you grew up like I did in a house where love was rationed through obedience, and the child who told the truth was labeled the problem. Maybe you still think if you do one more generous, quiet, perfect thing, they will finally recognize you as theirs. I hope you hear me. Generosity cannot make a person who needs control choose love instead. Money cannot turn a taker into a giver. Walking away is not a failure. Sometimes it is the first honest thing you do. There are days I still check the old group chat out of old muscle and find nothing but the echo of arguments I no longer attend. My parents' narrative is probably thriving somewhere watered by people who prefer cohesion to truth. But I don't live there anymore. I live here in a small apartment with a plant that keeps trying even when I forget to water it, with a sister who calls to celebrate small victories, like not crying at the dentist with a folder of evidence I hope I never need, with a name on a lease that reads "Only Mine." If you're watching this wondering if your story counts, if your pain is loud enough to deserve a boundary, count it. Make the call, change the emergency contact, cancel the bouquet you bought to sugarcoat cruelty. Keep your receipts so memory can't be gaslit. Believe the first. You shouldn't have come. You hear not the apology that follows when the audience changes. People reveal themselves. Believe them. The night I left the anniversary party, I thought the relief I felt would vanish in the morning, that I would wake to the old pull of guilt like an undertow. I didn't. Some griefs are thunder, some are fog lifting. I began to understand what it meant to be prepared without being afraid, to keep documents not as weapons, but as guardrails, to build a life where the doorbell doesn't make your stomach drop. My father once said, "Don't forget who gave you everything," and I say without cruelty that I finally remembered who gave me the most, the woman who rose from that kitchen threshold and chose herself. She gave me mornings with sunlight and evenings without performance, a sister without strings, a life not measured in repayments. She gave me a name that doesn't come with a bill. If there is a moral stitched through this, it is simple, and hard love is not proved by self-erasure. Family that requires you to shrink will never notice your disappearing act until they lose the benefits of it. You are not ungrateful for wanting air. You are not cruel for refusing to be currency. You are not broken for leaving a room that breaks you. Someone will tell you that forgiveness means going back. It does not. Sometimes forgiveness is tasting your coffee on a balcony and not flinching when the past walks by in your mind. Sometimes it is sending rent directly to your sister instead of through the story that tried to steal her gratitude. Sometimes it is letting your parents' narrative exist elsewhere, while you build a life that does not depend on their version of you. I'm not heroic. I am average and stubborn, and I learned the delayed miracle of refusing to trade my peace for their approval. If you needed permission, take mine. If you needed a sign, take this. If you needed proof that the ground holds when you step off the stage, watch me standing in my own doorway. I will be here growing basil, answering Katie's calls, making room for the kind of love that doesn't demand a receipt. If someday we meet two strangers who recognize something old and tender in each other's posture, I will offer you the lesson I bled for. Your worth is not a family project. It is your birthright. Guard it. Spend it where it returns as safety and laughter. Refuse to bargain it for a seat at a table that insists you apologize for eating. I left the house as their daughter and arrived home as my own. The road between those doorways is the story. I'm telling it to you so you know you can walk it too. If this story moved you, tap like to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who might need courage today. Subscribe for more true stories about boundaries and healing, and comment with the moment that resonated most for you. You never know who your words might help.